Question number 7, Honourable Phil Goff.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Trade. What are his bottom lines for New Zealand becoming a party to the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement?
Mr Speaker.
Honourable Tim Grosser.
Well, Mr Speaker, I can assure the member that there's a very clear bottom line, and that is when this negotiation, which has many moving parts, settles down, if it ever does, and we can see exactly what we're expected to do and exactly what we will get in return, unless it clearly is in our view the net national interest, and we are confident we can carry that debate, we won't be a party to the agreement.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, the Honourable Phil Goff.
When successive New Zealand governments have committed themselves strongly to the principle that the TPP must be high quality and comprehensive, will he sign up to a deal that doesn't meet that standard by continuing to allow damaging market access restrictions on major New Zealand exports such as dairy and beef? If so, why?
Mr Speaker,
Honourable Tim Grosser.
the only deal that I would recommend to our Cabinet and through them to this House that we accept and pass the enabling legislation would be a deal that addresses all of our issues on a comprehensive basis without any exceptions for our important export industries.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Phil Goff.
In the TPP agreement, will he compromise on New Zealand's sovereign right to legislate for legitimate public policy goals in areas like health and the environment? If not, how will he guarantee New Zealand's right to constrain actions by foreign corporates that are detrimental to our public policy goals?
Mr
Honourable
Speaker.
Tim Grosser.
Well, the answer in principle is very clear. We will not sign agreements that do not allow legitimate public policy regulation in the public interest in the future. The devil will be in the detail in describing that, and that's an extremely complicated issue.
Supplementary question,
the Honourable Phil Goff.
Will he protect New Zealand's absolute right to prevent the promotion of a harmful product like tobacco by pushing to exclude tobacco from access to investor-state disputes procedures, and what support within the negotiations would there be for a stance of that nature?
Mr
Honourable Tim Grosser.
Well, this is one of the most sensitive issues in this negotiation, as the member well knows, and you know the strong support the New Zealand government has given to Australia on a case which, although not arising from these negotiations, arises from a previous negotiation. And we will ensure that we maintain a position whereby any future government can maintain very strong anti-tobacco legislation.
Supplementary question, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Honourable Phil Goff.
Why are groups in New Zealand with the public interest at heart, such as medical professionals, not given confidential access to draft texts when the United States reports indicate that multinational corporations have access to such texts in areas where they have vested financial interests?
Mr Speaker.
Honourable Tim Grosser.
Well, I can't comment on how other governments seek to invite their stakeholders into their consultation process. All I can say is that we have, with respect to this negotiation, the most effective and fullest form of stakeholder consultation. And if other groups feel they wish to engage in a more serious consultation, they know where to come.
Supplementary question, Mr
Supplementary
Speaker.
question, Honourable Phil Goff.
Mr Speaker, when the Minister has the right under TPP rules to provide negotiating texts in confidence to relevant groups outside of the government, why has he not taken advantage of that right to ensure that core groups like medical professionals are properly informed about the issues under negotiation?
Honourable Tim Grosser.
Mr. Speaker, we are trying to make this negotiation a success, and the member is well aware that there are some quite heavy politics here, that full disclosure to certain parties is likely to lead this to go immediately into the public debate on an ill-informed basis before the deal has been done. We are very conscious of the interests of New Zealand in protecting themselves from such legislation, and we will continue to take a very responsible approach in this negotiation.
Order. Supplementary question, Right Honourable Winston Peters. Point of order. Sorry. Point of order, the Honourable
Mr. Speaker, the critical part of my question was to provide draft negotiating text in confidence, which the Minister did not answer.
I listened very carefully to the question, and because it was quite a substantial question, the Minister has adequately, to my satisfaction, addressed the question that was asked. Supplementary question. Right Honourable.
When will the government abandon its policy of evasion, obfuscation and secrecy and tell the New Zealand public exactly what concessions and sacrifices the New Zealand government has already agreed to in the TPP negotiations?
Honourable Tim Grosser.
Well, happily, Mr. Speaker, we don't have a policy of evasion and obfuscation to abandon.
Supplementary question.
How can he claim...
I'm just waiting for a bit more quiet here. Supplementary question, the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
How can he claim to be part of an open and transparent government when there's been zero public scrutiny and zero input publicly into the terms that New Zealand is agreeing to in the TPP negotiations, as evidenced in his answers today?
Honourable Tim Grosser.
Mr. Speaker, well, I would invite the member to reflect on his own extensive experience in government, and he will be well aware that in the process of forming positions, they are held under strict confidentiality until the decision is taken, and then there is a process of full accountability, and this will be no different.
Question number 8, Madama Fox.
Kia ora te mana whakawā. My question